Aha, várj másodperc. Szerencsére biztos nem ez volt az. Nem, ugyanaz. Mit akarsz? Hol? Rosszul nézem, de is mondom. Igen, amint megnéztem. De onnantól, hogy bekapcsolsz. Újszerűen azt amint visszaadnak fel a vigyázzák. Jól megy.
Azt hittem, hogy nagyobb a frontendsége, meg kívülről. Jó izmos az optika. Ahhoz képest
kis... ennek ilyen furcsán mozgó.
Ahhoz képest egy pindurka valami.
Igen.
Érdekes.
Spórolottak a lencseméletem, mert hogy a más kamerákhoz képest nagyobb a szentről. Nagyobb a képkop, azaz több fény, mint ekkor. A szokásos kameramérletnek a nagyjából ilyen 2, 3, 4, 5-szörösen. Tehát ezeknek a kis videóknak, amik voltak, annak az 5-szörösen. Tehát 5-ször annyi fényükre az Neked milyen géped van? 24x36-os?
Nem full fény.
Nem full fény? Akkor ugyanakkor ez.
Nem full fény.
Mi ez a nagyjából ilyen 15,7x21, ugye? Valahogy így. Tehát a full frame-nek nagyjából a fele. Hát ez is. Úgy hívják a képtechnikában, hogy Super 35-ös. Mert hogy ugyanakkor a képbontó képszenzor, mint a 35 mm-es filmnek a képkapuja.
Ügyelni.
Akkor 6. Hozd ide a másikat, még egyszer mondom. Tessék.
Tudom, amire majd
Igen,
folytatnak.
igen, az üres.
Melyiket akarod?
Van, ugye? Végig tettem. Kettő másodpercenként egy percet.
Javító mellett ezt mondják, hogy hozzá is.
Várjál, Dénes, ez az üres, add vissza a másikat. Itt?
Na most cseréltünk.
De azt add vissza, ami az előbb volt.
Ja.
Öt és fél perc. Öt és fél perc.
Akkor benne már
Minden persze. Kikapcsoltam. Ja.
I'm Helen. Hi. Oh, I'll come back to talk to you. Thanks for being here. Hi. Very good. I was told not to. Hey. That's absolutely fine. That's what I was expecting, so that's great. Find you online in just a second. Jó, oké. Jó. 2 perc van a pontos kérdés. Szerintem egy ilyen 10.
Neked. Nem, az egyik nem hágít, csak az világítom megyik.
Éppen ezek menni fog. Szeretném irányítani, hogy tenni.
Ilyen.
Hát, egy tűzderítés megállásán jelenleg világít.
So, worship is just the idea that we have to see. Actually,
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Those of you who have honored us with your presence this afternoon, welcome. It's a very interesting session that we're looking forward to this afternoon. We're going to talk about other aspects of today's issue of the future of Europe. We're going to talk about competitiveness from the Hungarian and the British point of view. And we're talking about growth this afternoon, about transatlantic trade and investment partnership. And I am happy to announce that at 7:15, after the closing remarks of His Excellency Jonathan Nutt, we're going to have a drinks reception. For those of you that stay, very much hope that you will enjoy this session. In the first one, we will have as speakers Mr. Péter Lőrince from the National Association of Entrepreneurs and Employees, BOSZ, Vice President of Tigranian Development Corporation, Mr. Csaba Poroszlai, who is CFO of IGIS, and Mrs. Helen McComb from UK Better Regulation Executive. We will hear the damages caused by inefficient regulation in the EU, and what the UK and the Hungarian government, and from Mrs. McComb, what the UK government and business has done to address these issues. The panel discussion afterwards will be chaired by former governor of the Hungarian National Bank, Mr. Péter Bod Ákos. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. The select few to stay here after the good lunch. And we have two topics and three speakers, as you heard. The first topic is competitiveness, and further I would like Péter Lőrince to present your case, please. You may stay here or use the microphone there as you wish. Time limit is strict.
Thank you very much, Mr. Professor. If I may, I would like to invite you to tell a few words about your personal experience, how you try to regulate Hungarian industry. As you were not only governor of the National Bank of Hungary, but you were the first Minister of Industry since the first really elected government in 1990. But let us go back to my speech. Ladies and gentlemen, the organizers convened this conference at a very appropriate time. A new government is being formed, and in my best recollection, each government since 1990 pledged. Each government since 1990 pledged to cut back red tape and to alleviate the administrative burdens of the business sector. We, as National Association of Entrepreneurs and Employers, also had a good cooperation since 2010 with the Ministry for National Economy in this subject. But having said that, the results are controversial. The Ministry claimed that their actions eliminated the cost of several hundred billions of forints, while most of our member companies felt just the opposite, that their administrative duties in fact increased. So goodwill was there, but the outcome is debatable. Plus, governmental agencies usually operate with nationwide data, but it seems it is not enough. In the future, we have to scrutinize a mix of concrete enterprises, like small, big, medium, industrial, trading, services, etc. And their concrete examples should demonstrate that burden was in fact reduced. When we had the above exercise, we did not know what red tape came from Brussels and what stemmed from Hungarian sources. Now, reading the British report, which Helen will introduce, we can realize in what sectors undue EU regulation can be looked after. Needless to say, the concrete principles of the report laid down apply to every regulation, no matter whether they were approved at national or at EU level. We are convinced every government in Europe should accept that when they regulate, they must improve competitiveness of their enterprises and not reduce them. Also, it makes a lot of sense that as often as possible, micro-enterprises and young companies should be exempted from regulation. Unfortunately, often this is not the case. I also represent Hungarian entrepreneurs in the Paris-based Business and Industry Advisory Committee, which debates from the business perspective OECD documents and OECD directives, like, for instance, the code of conduct of multinational enterprises. My impression often was, in this case, that several governments were inclined to extend this regulation to the SME sector as well. Well, the report mentions impact studies. I doubt governments like that very much. Why? First, it makes quick legislation impossible. Second, its findings are numerical, concrete, and therefore can be challenged. In spite of this, we strongly hope that the incoming government will accept that no regulation can be introduced without a proper impact study, the outcome of which should be discussed with employer organizations such as all of us. We hope that the argumentation of the paper, like, and I quote, removal of all outstanding barriers to trade in services could lead to an additional gain to the EU economy of 1.8% of EU GDP. Will sound convincing to governments, especially today when most of the European countries have growth of around 1 or 2%. And let us not forget that this additional GDP, which is the result of trade, cross-border trade in services, will enrich, first of all, the SME sector, which are a very significant player of trade in services. And again, do not forget that very, very, very little additional investment will be required to produce. So just by eliminating undue regulation, you can have this additional. If the arguments are so convincing, why on earth government agencies so often resist? I participated on behalf of our national association in several debates with authorities, where the aim of the talks was to eliminate existing and unnecessary regulation. This process proved to be very slow and painful. Why? Let us not forget that regulations must be enforced, monitored, compliance checked, etc. Red tape is a cost to the business on one hand, on the other, provides jobs for the state administration. I also realized that data means power. If you are authorized to collect data, that means you can interpret and publish them. This is not the same as if you simply receive data from someone else. And let us not forget that regulation means that people from a government agency can interpret them. Of course, you can intervene and say that according to the rules, in principle, only courts can interpret law or decree. Yes, in principle, but in practice. But what should we do? Our British colleagues collected many proposals and identified many obstacles. The aim can only be to change the relevant EU legislation. And when you eliminate the legislation, it is a very good opportunity to decide, as it was said in the session prior to luncheon, is really EU-wide regulation here necessary or not? But to change the legislation can only be done with the support of the governments. Consequently, we as employer organizations should press our national governments to support what our British colleagues put forward. What is a cost for a British company usually is a cost for a Hungarian one as well. And here we should like to do this battle on international front, and we should also engage employer organizations like the Paris-based Business and Industry Advisory Committee, where I am vice chair. And yesterday I spoke with the Secretary General of our sister organization, NGOs, and he agreed to put forward this issue at the session of the Secretary Generals of Member Enterprises of Business Europe. Why I am optimistic in the final analysis? When preparing this statement, I heard in the radio an interview with the Executive Vice Chairman of the bigger government party, Fidesz, Mayor Lajos Kósa from Debrecen, who said that during his next term in Parliament, he plans to start a program of deregulation, and he already obtained the support of the Prime Minister. His ambitions are to cut back red tape by 1/3. His numbers were that today we have 300,000. Can you imagine? 300,000. This is a country of slightly less than 10 million people. 300,000 regulations affecting business, and he wants to cut it back to 200,000. I hope to see the results soon. Thank you very much for the organizers, thank you very much our British colleagues, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Peter, for your contribution, knowing that you're between two demanding trips to China, so I wish you successful trip, but don't leave because there will be some time left for reacting, which is I encourage the members of the panel to come back to some topics raised by one of the speakers. Now, next speaker represents industry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I'm from Aegis, that's a pharmaceutical company based in Hungary. We are 100 years old, and not myself company. And we have a revenue of roughly 500 million euros since we are here in the British Embassy. That's a little less than 400 million pounds. The question that was raised to me was, what's our standpoint regarding how EU could ensure competitiveness so that companies can employ more people? And I want to tell you that we are overall, we like EU, but this is not the place to give appraisal for EU. This is the place to give feedback on what can be improved. So our answer to this question, there could be a lot of answers. our answer to this question is please level the playing field. And what we mean by that is not EU against national regulations, it's EU against non-EU. Because what we see and how we feel is on the next two slides, where this is how we feel. On slide number 5, or I like better the next one. This is how we feel. This is EU regulator. These are us and other generic companies inside the EU, and those are the non-EU generic companies. So what we see mostly is that the EU is very rigorous with us, with EU companies, which is good. But sometimes it's too rigorous, and sometimes it's rigorous in cases where those regulations cannot be enforced to companies that are outside the EU. And that makes that results in a clear competitive disadvantage without any result, because the companies outside the EU that are not falling under the regulations, they can circumvent them, or even we can circumvent them by doing business outside the EU. And the result is loss of competitiveness for the EU and loss of jobs for the EU. I wrote one short example because of the very short time I received, but it's good. The example is this one, I would say, side effect of the so-called SPC, which is the Supplementary Protection Certificate. This is an extra intellectual property, extra patent protection inside the EU for companies that make innovations. And there are two major results of that. Is that if a product is under an SPC, so still protected, you cannot sell the product inside the EU, so no sale. But also no production under SPC. So if a product is patented or protected by the SPC, you cannot produce that product up until the SPC expires inside the EU. And this is where our problem lies, because what happens, the consequence is that we cannot even produce to export to other countries where there is no SPC. That we don't see why this is good for the EU. And we cannot prepare, we cannot build up stocks as a preparation for the expiry of the SPC. And the problem here is that in the generic arena, on the day one, when the patent expired, like 10 companies enter the market. And if a product is protected by SPC, of course, those 10 companies come from production of outside the EU. And I'm not talking about theory. In practice, our company also already has 2 products where we had to go outside the EU to produce them because of the SPC. So what happens is that third countries can produce those drugs because, like for example, in Turkey or India or China or most parts of the world, there is no such thing as an SPC. So they can produce and supply our markets as well, because we export to non-EU countries as well. And also they can prepare for EU SPC expiry. So this is a double trouble, I would say. And what is the result that I already mentioned is that, of course, we are big enough and grown-up people to realize this, and what we can do is that we outsource this production outside of the EU, which means that we can keep our competitiveness, but this is a loss of jobs for the EU. It's clear, simple. And the solution also could be simple. It's just so-called, it had already a lot of names, SPC export exception or manufacturing border, or it runs under several names. But only a little alteration would need to be done in the legislation, and that would result in companies. We could produce in the EU, not sell in the EU under SPC, but we could produce in the EU, build up stocks waiting for the SPC expiry, and we could export to Russia, which is, by the way, our main country, for example, where there is no such thing as SPC. And that we would be very happy to see that, because to do a technological transfer from our plant to a Turkish plant or an Indian plant, that's also a huge burden on us. So basically, that's my example due to the constraint of time. Unfortunately, I could bring other examples as well, but this is how it is. Overall, we like the EU, but in some cases we see that maybe there's less thinking about global competitiveness than looking inside the EU. We always look inside what happens in the EU, but we tend to forget that there is a world outside, and if we don't look at the consequences of global competitiveness, then we arrive at things like that. So, thank you very much.
What you made, and we'll come back later in the discussion. So let's just move on to the story about the US response to the don't-cut red tape.
Thanks very much for your kind introduction, and thanks all very much for coming along to listen. I'm Helen McComb, and I work for the UK Government's Better Regulation Executive. We're a team in the Ministry of Economy, and we work closely with the Prime Minister's office, and we deal with both domestic regulatory management and EU regulation policy. So I'm here today to try and explain why the UK is so keen to press EU institutions to deliver better regulation. Also to explain what changes were recommended by a task force of UK businesses in consultation with other European businesses, which the UK government is backing. And finally, I'm going to say just a little bit about what we and other groups are trying to do now to get those changes to happen. You might not have come across better regulation before, and if you haven't, I would just describe it as being mostly about improving the quality of new legal proposals and also existing laws by using tools like impact assessments or reviews on a case-by-case basis. And it can also be about having clear organisational responsibilities for managing regulation. And it can also have a bit of a programme element to it, whereby people often use better regulation programmes to try and press government officials into doing reviews of existing laws, say to reduce costs or to improve them in particular ways. And some countries are increasingly having better regulation programmes for new laws too, to try and limit the cost of those or to make them happen in a certain way. So that's the real basic background. So as I say, I'm going to start a little bit of context. Why does the UK government champion better regulation? I mean, I personally think it's really important. We're in a situation where EU regulation is both unavoidable and really very costly for many businesses. EU regulation is probably the main source of regulation for quite a few certain sectors, probably like the pharma sector there that we've heard about. I mean, EU regulation is unavoidable. We need EU rules to create a single market that then lets businesses trade and compete and grow across Europe. We need EU rules for fair competition. We need them to deliver on promises to help consumers and the environment, and we wouldn't question that. But EU rules are genuinely costly. From Britain, we think that about half of all the regulatory costs that hit the UK businesses come from European law. So if you want to reduce regulatory costs, you can't ignore the EU. It's massive, essentially. So that's the basic situation. But there are also some problems linked to EU laws and the ways they get made. There seem certainly to be some issues about efficiency. Where we are, we often hear complaints about burdensome rules for businesses. We hear some citizens and customers complaining about inflexibility as well. We've had a really good example just there, but we hear quite a lot of things. We also get evidence from UK studies where we find that some of the ways in which the EU likes to regulate can bring quite a lot of extra cost. So the EU seems to quite like making people do a lot of labelling, doing a lot of record keeping, or maybe doing things in a really one-size-fits-all way. So that might mean that, unfortunately, a European law could turn out to be quite a bit more expensive than a national law that it's replacing. So we certainly do see that there can be efficiency issues. And on top of being less efficient. The European system isn't really showing it's very good at correcting and preventing problems, unfortunately. So there have been European better regulation projects, but they move quite slowly. At the EU level, there's a big problem for their people in understanding feedback and responding to it. They're not that close to businesses. But even though the Commission's done some good work to have impact assessment and evaluation systems to bring in evidence, I mean, my perspective is that there are too many Brussels decision makers who seem to be a bit complacent. They seem to think, you know, they're in their Brussels bubble, it's okay to ignore evidence, you know, if they say that they believe in businesses, even if they act in a certain way that seems right to them, maybe it's all okay. So that's kind of where our sense of the problem we need to act comes from. If I was to explain the UK government concerns in more personal terms, I would basically talk about our ministers' experiences. So Britain has got really quite strong domestic better regulation programmes. Like the first speaker was saying, it is basically about challenging civil servants not to regulate. It's not easy, it's quite tough work, but we're really serious about it. So the coalition government, since they came to power, have been applying these programmes. They've managed to reduce costs to UK businesses by just over £1 billion a year in terms of annual costs. So they've seen that with a lot of political will and drive, it can really make a difference. But also since they came to power, our coalition ministers have been joining up with leaders of like-minded member states, and they've been pressing the EU to also use better regulation as a tool for growth. But as I said, there's been some welcome action from the European Commission, but as the years have gone on, our ministers have got a little bit frustrated about the slow pace of change and about the number of times that they've seen rules that look bad for growth still coming out. And, you know, to be honest, the Prime Minister probably gets a bit bored of being told that the process is changing, things are going to happen, you know, when he asks time and time again for people to take this seriously. And there's a definite concern in the UK government about global competition. You know, it's not just the case that we can just have the laws that suit us and we can make them in a kind of slow way and that'll all be okay, because if we're content to keep on doing that, there's a real risk that things go offshore and things get outsourced. So I think it really is something we have to get to grips with. So all those concerns are really why David Cameron decided he wanted to take a slightly different approach last summer. And he decided he wanted to ask businesses the question, what changes to EU regulations do we most need to help businesses succeed and grow? So I'll tell you about the task force, because that was that project in just a sec. But, you know, obviously the UK government support, as I've just explained, for better regulation, it's got lots of reasons behind it, lots of economic reasons. It builds on long-standing support. We do believe smart regulation can be good for all kinds of stakeholders, including consumers, including citizens, because actually having ineffective regulation that doesn't work isn't particularly good for anybody. But at the same time, it's true that at the moment we really think, particularly in Europe, there needs to be a real focus on removing unnecessary costs in business. You will know about the economy, I'm not real on that. Okay, so I want to talk a bit about the Business Task Force report. I think I've put we've got little things on your chairs that give you the main headline findings there. So last summer, David Cameron asked 6 business leaders to go out to talk to other business people across Europe and to come back and tell him what changes to EU regulations do we need to help businesses succeed. So the 6 business leaders on the task force have got quite different backgrounds. I've met a few of them, I haven't met all of them. But, so one of them, Glenn, he's got a small exporting firm. They make bollards that come out of roads and block off roads, and they export them around Europe, despite being a small firm. Dale, she's an entrepreneur. She invests in small startups. We had Louise, who heads up a pharmaceutical firm. And then we had the real big hitters, Ian and Paul, who are from Diageo, really big drinks company, and Kingfisher, which is involved in building products across Europe. And finally, we had the Dutchman, Mark Bolland, who runs Marks and Spencer's, a big British retailer. So that was our task force. They came together to meet. They were allowed to call on the civil service to help them gather data and to help them do consultations. They also went and talked to their own contacts. And we had the help of embassies as well, who went out and collected views from around Europe. So, having done their research, they had inputs from over 100 European business organisations and businesses. They put together the report, and as I say, you've got the headline findings on your chairs there. And they used it to spell out the changes that they think, in the view of businesses, would be good for European regulation. I might just read out, if I may, to summarise what's in there, a statement that one of the task force members made on the launch day. Because I'm a civil servant, you know, and I have to talk in very measured languages, but the businesses get really passionate about this stuff, and I just wanted to give you some of their words. So imagine I'm Dale, imagine I'm an entrepreneur. So what they said was, as business leaders, we know the benefits of being able to access the European market of 500 million customers. And we believe the single market has real potential to boost growth across Europe. But all too often, the European rules that come with it actually act as barriers to growth. Poorly understood, pointless and burdensome rules mean that fewer inventions get patented, fewer sales get made, fewer goods get produced, and fewer jobs get created. And red tape has the biggest impact on smallest companies, which we know create around about 80% of new European jobs. We, the Business Task Force, want to help change that. So we put forward some clear, practical reforms that we think will make a real difference to businesses across Europe, and not just those in Britain. They aren't just our ideas, they've come from more than 250 suggestions from over 100 businesses and business organisations across Europe. This is about pushing the bureaucrats to listen to businesses about what we actually need to do to compete and thrive in the global race. And we hope this will be taken seriously across the EU. We've got two clear priorities. Sweep away existing barriers in 5 important areas in the life of a business, from starting out to exporting to expanding, to developing new products, to just being overall competitive. And prevent similarly unnecessary legislation in the future by getting EU lawmakers to put businesses and not bureaucracy first, and to follow clear principles that should be integral to any new EU rules. So in terms of barriers, we've identified 30 areas where we think the EU should prioritise action. From removing silly rules that make gardeners pay a fee and register so that they can take away grass cuttings and help fix your garden, to simplifying the process of VAT refunds. From costly chemicals regulation, which is stopping small companies from developing new products or expanding, to recommendations on traineeships, which could undermine businesses' unwillingness to take on young people. But we're not against regulation in itself. We need some to operate in a pan-European market, but it needs to be pro-growth. And so we've proposed some compete principles as a common sense filter through which any new EU regulation should pass. It's impossible to put a precise figure on how much changing these rules would be worth, but even a conservative estimate would put it at tens of billions of euros. And remember, European governments don't have to find that money, they just have to find some political will to make changes here. So that's it. Stop being Dale, I'm back to being myself. But that's what the Business Task Force said, you know, they're really passionate about this stuff. There's 30 rules in there that I've identified as problems, which are genuine problems. Quite a lot of businesses across Europe, not necessarily that to fix. The Business Task Force, the UK government, really wants those to be changed. And then in addition, they've given us some advice about how to change the system so that this kind of thing doesn't happen again. So that brings me to my third point. I wanted to now explain a little bit what the UK government and others are trying to do to secure changes. The task force presented their report to a meeting essentially of our Council of Ministers who backed the recommendations. Since then, British ministries who've been responsible for the 30 problem rules identified have been working really hard to get changes. And we're pleased to say that we managed to get changes already in 9 of those. So, for example, there's been quite a good clinical trials regulation that's recently been passed, which should be good news for European manufacturers. And in addition, we've managed to prevent them being some overly complex rules about labelling meat as an ingredient with lots and lots of detail. In the future, we're going to keep on working on the other dossiers there. Some of them are quite long-term. The business task force didn't just talk about getting rid of regulation, they talked about having more regulation in selected areas to level the playing field. So the trade deals was one of the things that they pointed to as being important, and you're going to hear all about that later. That's a massive, big, long-term project. Again, you know, single market reform and services is also in there and is a huge long-term project. But the UK government and like-mindeds are going to keep on working on those specific dossiers. In terms of policy processes, the compete principles, my team has been working quite hard with other member states and stakeholder bodies to build support for those principles, for the idea of improving things like impact assessments at the European level, ideas like having a programme that encourages EU rules to be reviewed on a periodic basis. I'm pleased to say that we've got some quite big bodies with us now. The European Parliament has come out in a resolution being quite supportive. Business Europe, a number of business organisations are joining our kind of demands and suggestions. We will have to see with the changes in Europe whether we see any significant new big steps getting taken in the coming months. We certainly hope that might happen. And of course, by coming here, I was hoping that perhaps I would manage to persuade some of you to take an interest and to encourage further interest in European better regulation from Hungarian stakeholders. I think Peter's already said that he's taking an interest, he's taking it seriously, which is great. Perhaps some of you guys might want to as well. I hope so. If you have any more questions after today, feel free to try and contact my team through the embassy, because we'd be delighted to hear from you. We'd be delighted to answer any questions. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for the concept presentation of this exercise. We're very efficient with the use of time, so time left for cross reaction and questioning. We may invite the audience to raise questions. Let me raise myself as sharing a question to both of you and also for the speaker. Peter Levens was kind enough to recall the heroic times 25 years ago when the Hungarian regime changed and the old regime collapsed. As a member of the then government, I had to look after the industry and trade. And I do remember that the buzzword at that time was deregulation, lifting of the regulation. But suddenly we learned, for instance, in the business like tourism, that huge firms created out of nothing with no capital and no skills. They took package to Turkey and then it went bankrupt for the weekend, and the government had to shift back the tourists, so the embassy was sort of a traveling agency in the country. So we had to therefore conclude that sometimes better re-regulation is better than no regulation. So this is the background of my question. Lifting barriers versus intelligent re-regulation and keeping standards. What is the main dimension of the exercise in the UK, or what is the wish of the Hungarian business leaders? Less regulation or more intelligent regulation? It may sound general, but it might be useful to have your views.
Our agenda at the European level is very much better regulation, smarter regulation. We do acknowledge that we've got to have rules to make single market work, to make some of the important benefits of Europe be achieved. Also, we have to work with others in Europe, and smart regulation is where the consensus is, where the support. There are all sorts of ways around subsidiarity and so on, and certainly at the British domestic level, I think some of our ministers are probably quite confident saying they'd like them to be less than Europe. But at the European level, they would like to see some things that encourage people to think about it. They would like to see devices and tools that encourage European decision makers, especially to think about European consumers, to think about is it sensible or is it dangerous to have tough regulation in Europe? There is the tough regulation somewhere else. You know, is that going to lead to a lot of close action? So that's a certain consideration.
Well, I think that in general, I can agree with Helen that we want to have better regulation, and like she said, we are not against regulation per se, but we should like to see some principles observed. For instance, it was already mentioned that quite often the EU regulation penalizes companies which reside in the EU. So there is now a new wave of regulation coming, for instance, in the field of environment, and many companies within Europe are afraid that it will be an additional burden for them, but it will not be a burden for those who are outside of the European Union, and they will be able to export under more lenient circumstances to the European Union, thereby endangering jobs. So that is something which we should like to avoid. The second principle I should like to stress is that, well, we accept that a company must be held responsible even for those causes which are outside of its company boundaries. For instance, I accept that a company which is buying services or goods from someone else can be held responsible. Yes, for something the recipient company is supposed to know and can control. But if this is something which the supplier company has done elsewhere, maybe even outside of Europe, and without the proper knowledge of the recipient company, that is not possible to be held accountable. And the third principle I should like to mention is that, well, yes, MNCs, they understand what a regulation is, they understand what compliance is, they have the staff to monitor and check compliance, but the MNCs, yes, but the SMEs, they do not even understand what compliance is. So I think that we should take into account that SMEs is a different category. And here I should like to refer to the statement of the Conservative MP from Yorkshire in the first chapter of discussion. Well, he said, Business Europe is not representing SMEs. True. Now, the Business and Industry Advisory Committee, the Paris-based organization where I am vice chair, we are not representing SMEs as well. So, but who is representing SMEs in Brussels? That is a question where I think we need very much the cooperation and the advice of government representatives from the United Kingdom, and maybe we can do something together.
Thank you very much. We'll come back to it. Now, George, you made a very strong case for the in your call for flexibility concerning the SPC, as I understand. And my obvious question is that it's not an issue for one single company. It's an issue for a set of companies. So why don't you just join forces and lobby because rules are written somewhere and passed by somebody, and therefore in Europe there must be a path, a procedure, not only to make rules but also to change.
Yes, thank you. Of course, it is really not an ACE issue and not even an annual issue. It's a pan-European issue. So there's this organization, the European Generic Association. It's there. Unfortunately, I read the letters back and forth, which went to Brussels and which came back from Brussels. And the ones that came back from Brussels were, the answers were kind of general and didn't really address the issue at hand. So that's why we tried to bring up the case where possible, because we think it's very clear-cut. It's one of the simplest. As I mentioned in my presentation, I could have brought here several other issues as well, but this one is the easiest to understand. And it's so clear that one can ask really why it's not happening. But it's not happening. Although we have united forces, we are in Brussels through the EGA, and we already sent the letter to whom it is concerned. But the answers are not really. The answers do not really give us optimism so far.
Thank you. It raised something very interesting. The high standards, environmental standards, we actually look at from your point of view. High environmental standards is something we will support.
Yes.
In theory.
Yeah.
How do you manage to reconcile the two?
I thought you were directing this question to me. No, it's good. But
overall, but it's not his question.
Well, as far as we see, when the regulation is reintroduced, which is stricter for environmental, for quality, or for whatever, as a citizen, it's always very good. And as a businessman, I always see that in the short term, it gives a hinder to competitiveness. And in the long term, it depends whether the world will follow EU or not. If the world will follow EU, then in the end, EU turns out the champion, and the competitiveness disadvantage goes back to competitive advantage. But if the world does not follow us, then we are there with some regulation which is overly strict. Non-EU companies can circumvent it easily, and there are the loss of jobs. So in the short term, it's always a drop in competitiveness, and in the long term, it's a question whether we will be champions or we will be just dogs.
We are raising the question because if we invite businessmen to comment on regulation, their instinct is to have less regulation, but we may also forget a little bit about social concerns, environmental concerns. So how can we screen out that sort of bias or potential bias because as a civil servant, you represent the public good rather than just short-term business.
I think the main point I would make about how you decide would be evidence. And, a lot of the kind of compete principles and the ideas of policy making that we're promoting are about proper impact assessments. They're about trying to gather data that's more objective to look at the costs, what are the benefits, is the action worth it? Sometimes you might think, there's cost to the action worth it. But I think, certainly if you look at the first associated task force, I think sometimes things might have a theoretical benefit, but they very clearly want a cost. And I think we maybe do also need to consider, given at the moment we've got the best economic growth, but being a bit more strict with ourselves about having things that costs and sure benefits. So if I take a couple of task force recommendations, I think where the businesses are getting really passionate, it's not so much about the cost, but the fact that that's the cost. So there's a task force in there about soils framework directive. This was proposed about 8 years ago, and it hasn't gone anywhere in negotiation because it's really costly and really sure it's a good idea. The European Commission withdrew the other day, thank goodness. But it could have had some benefits. In theory, the idea is let's have something that's to make people protect soils, keep soils nice. But in practice, what the proposal was saying that farmers had to keep records and do lots of measurements of soil and try and be a bit nicer to soil. And it was very clear that that was going to cost quite a lot of money, but the actual amount by which the soils were going to get to be better was kind of far from clear. And so it's always the case that with regulation, and you've got to try and understand the detail of the specific case. You know, in that situation, the businesses were saying to us, this isn't a good idea, and you know, the government's kind of agreed because it's not even that we're clearly saying we don't need that benefit, so we're saying, well, even if there would be a benefit, and there's certainly very, you know, regulation doesn't need to be the answer to fixing the worst problems. Sometimes you should try other things first. And I just worry that sometimes in Brussels we try and regulate first and then, you know, discover it doesn't work and then regulate again. I'm sure that's the best.
Thank you.
Well, unfortunately, I'm not very optimistic. You know, I am 66. My first job I took in 1970. I joined the Hungarian Chamber of Commerce in 1971. And at that time, well, business was extremely organized with the International Chamber of Commerce, with the International Organization of Employers, and the other parts of the society, not so much. Now, when I look at OECD today, I see that business organizations, they lost a lot of their relative importance, and when we discuss issues important for the business, well, we face a number of NGOs, and they are very vocal. Their vocabulary is totally different from us, but as they seem to control a big chunk of electorate, governments listen to them, and quite often business has to be on the defensive. Now, I'm sure that the way out of this is that business has to learn how to compete with the NGOs using data of business, while business seems not to control, for instance, important universities. So I think that the tendency for the time being is negative for the business. But I would like to mention that we failed to analyze one of the biggest reasons of negative competitiveness of European industry, and that's the energy prices. Well, there are a number of OECD studies which clearly point out that energy prices in Europe are twice as high as in the United States, because, well, the European Union is very keen to increase the share of renewable energy, you know, 3 times 20, etc., etc. But unfortunately, renewable energy cannot be brought to the market without extra prices being charged, which makes renewable energy profitable, but that pushes the average energy prices up. So that is also something which, for the sake of the European industry, well, the government and the EU has to address.
Thank you very much. I just want to ask whether you want to react to each other as members of panel. Nothing left in the air. Shall we take questions from the floor? Just, I'm not sure if it's part of the procedure, but if somebody is, John, if you want to raise a question, please. There's a mic.
Thank you very much. Well, Mr. Chairman, you actually asked my first question I wanted to ask, which was we were talking about smart regulation, but you were wondering whether there was a question of less regulation, and we got an answer that was very helpful and interesting, but to me slightly alarming from Helen, because what she said was that at the European level, at least, fundamentally it's really a discussion about smarter regulation, getting it right, rather than getting rid of the regulations, although that might occasionally happen. This surely is a recipe for accumulating over-government and over-regulation. After all, what does Brussels do? It is a vast regulatory apparatus. It manufactures that legislation. And as the last, as the gentleman from the Hungarian SMEs pointed out, very often now you have not only big business wanting the same thing to make difficulties for its small business competitors, but they're joined by NGOs and so on. So you have a vast regulatory apparatus. And apparently, I would suggest, Helen, that your organization is itself a symptom of this. And I don't mean this in an hostile, I would simply put the idea that because regulation is inevitable, we now have to have another level of government that examines what kind of regulations are going to, and criticizes them and tries to change them. Now, it's not altogether, is it altogether true, and this, I suppose, is addressed to all members of the panel, that this is necessary? Harmonization, EU harmonization of regulations is really a product of the 80s onwards. Before then, you had a lot of mutual, the basis of regulations was mutual recognition. And the great advantage of that is that if different countries have different levels of regulation, then there is an answer, which isn't just simply arguing, presenting petitions to Brussels, but you can pick up your enterprise and move elsewhere. And as several speak, that means harmonization within the EU, but it exists outside it. And German industry is at the moment taking advantage of the ability to export enterprises outside the EU. So my suggestion is, why can't we move back much more towards from harmonization to mutual recognition and the jurisdictional competition that allows as a way of placing some restraint on what seems to me the otherwise inevitable growth of the political leviathan.
Thank you very much. You want to raise the issue from the floor? Yes, please. Yeah, Mike, please.
Thank you, Richard Crowder from Foreign Office in London. One comment and one question. The comment was on the issue of energy prices, which Peter touched on just a few moments ago. I think it's also worth mentioning in that context the impact of shale gas in terms of the difference between prices in the US and in Europe, and of course the potential to develop those resources in Europe, which would have a significant downward impact on prices. My question was really in your various work that you've done on the impact of regulations and the potential for deregulation. How much do you see common ground across industry, particularly between big business and sort of small and medium-sized enterprises? Or are we really talking about different interest groups within industry with different concerns?
Well, thank you very much. Now, the coffee break is on the horizon, so please we have time. Please. Who wants to react? I think
It's fine. Thank you very much for your points, gentlemen, over there. As I say, our compete principles say the European Commission should introduce a one-in-one principle, so that's balance. We also say there should be a target to reduce the overall burden, but we would rather have something useful happen than nothing happen, so we're pushing for restraint and limits, and that's where the lines are at. It's quite a funny point that I live in a bit of bureaucracy that bothers other bureaucrats and tries to make them behave themselves and regulate nicely. Is it really necessary? The civil services find it to be an efficient way of controlling bureaucrats, really. If the politicians got in all the detail, maybe you would leave me. You know, my ultimate aim would be to make myself redundant, but it hasn't happened yet. And if people have got great ideas and ways to get things under control, get out there and sell them. And I thought it was some really interesting points there. I'm not a massive expert on harmonisation of mutual recognition. I don't think we do periodically examine whether we think we can make more progress with it. seems to have been a challenge to do it, but it is being explored further, I believe, at the moment in some of the sensitive areas of services. So to try and make progress where we can get it. So we'll see what happens there. But I think I don't really have a better answer. It's a very good question. Richard, you asked how much common ground there was. I think it varies. I mean, I'm sitting here with our big asks, which is 30 specific things and a whole bunch of principles. The 30 specific things obviously have a range of different constituencies, depending on what they are. And some people will go for 5 or 6, and some people will only care about 4. Some of them are about regulations that get everybody like company law, and some of them are quite specific. So a bit of variation there. I think there's a reasonable degree of common ground in terms of the principles and the way that we should be having a policy-making process that is more efficient and hopefully more effective too. I've got my chart here, which you can read it, but that's not the point. Different European kind of business organisations and which of the compete principles they've come out in favour of. And you can sort of see from that a bit closer. There's quite a lot of common ground actually. And certainly around the idea that impact assessments should be used, so we should have objective cost and benefit estimates, and we should use them to inform our decision making. It really is very much a lot of common ground there, which is very encouraging. And we'll hope to be able to make some progress with that.
Thank you very much. Just one final recommendation. As everything what is consumed in an economy is in the final analysis generated by business, I would encourage governments to propose that at the end of the 5-year period, departments of the European Commission be evaluated by business organizations from the point of view of how they served, according to the opinion of business, the issue of job creation and improvement in competitiveness. And then, you know, it would be up to the heads of government and prime ministers how they interpret, together with the president of the commission, the evaluation of industry.
First, I'm also not a specialist on harmonization versus mutual recognition, but from a company point of view, if you have pan-European business, harmonization is easy to handle. It's just one small comment. And for common ground, it depends on, it depends case by case. This case that I showed, it's totally common for all generic companies. It's not common with originator companies because they don't feel this as a barrier. But there are some other issues. Actually, there's one on your list to improve the reach. Well, that's for all pharma industry, regardless of generic and originator. So it's really case by case, whether you can find big common ground or small common ground.
Thank you very much. As a moderator, I think I don't have to summarize the story, but I kind of have to point out that the cost-benefit calculation must always be done and redone because we have this time inconsistency. A rule which looks like optimal can become suboptimal, which means a bad rule, but politely suboptimal. And there might be a lot of suboptimal regulations, therefore it makes sense to revisit the regulations and conduct this cost-benefit regulation, smart regulation and/or less regulation. And we shall not forget about the particular business segments like SMEs who have totally different challenges. Thank you very much for sharing.
I would just like to thank our distinguished speakers, and we are going to speed it up a little bit this afternoon, have a quicker break, about 5 to 10 minutes, and then we resume. Thank you very much.
Gyere be!
És akkor ezt volt, az üzenetet megettem.
Well, I've always thought amused by this concentration.
John, thank you ever so much. Not at all. Not at all. It's nice to see new friends. Yeah, you will. And I want to keep in touch. I think the idea of this regulation, one of those things is something which I think that there are a number of people get benefit from chatting to each other. They talk to me about this must change, but there doesn't seem to be a forum for Hungarian discussion. That's what we try and do is to put you all in a room together, shut the door, or lock it, let you all see what you think, and where this exactly. To come up with this with a piece of paper, demand is to aware taxation. But thank you for coming today. Really appreciate it. A big thank you. See you soon.
Good. Very nice to meet you. Yes, that was very good.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry. You do have to go back.
Gyere közelebb. Még közelebb. Lámpa felé. Gyere közelebb. Felé. Jó, most gyere ide, lámpa nélkül, nézzük meg. Oda. Jó, maradhat az 5000. Maradhat az 5000. Jó. Igen. Hát még van egy etap, nem? Vagy elmarad? Akkor miért kérdez?
Igen, próbáltam, hogy
Nem.
Mert ugyanis, tehát itt minden áll, ugyanaz az értéken marad, de az adat olyan a véges bármi. Tehát a kintra bejövök,
Na tényleg ahhoz, hogy mi, hogy sütanak, nincs perceken erről.
és hát most csak előztük, nem változott olyan.
Például van úgy, hogy szóval bejövök a lényesek van, hogy referenciákat van a felülilyen. Akkor én majd azt hiszem, hogy nem van örömben.
Igen. Bár még nem most egyébként 80 centiliter.
Igen, nagyon hangzott.
Csak a patatás.
Megy a livestream, erről, ugye? Nem most, hanem erről megy, ugye, ami a megy az interneten. Az nem ez?
Nem, az örök. Itt van ez.
Egy kis különböző kamera van.
Hát,
miért nem az meg? Nem egy beszél, nem?
most a kollégát kellene megkérdezni, hogy yeah.
You mean all those 15 people?
Yes, well, I speak it was only half of the people.
Okay, yes. Szóval, de most éppen nem megy, ugye?
Ezt nem tudom.
Most is megy, tehát ez így haladsz?
Hát ezt külön nem kezelem.
Tessék?
Külön nem kezelem. Itt van ennek
Akkor hallatszik.
két gazdája.
A mamámnak írtam egy üzenetet, hogy megnézzük a konferenciát ezen, és visszamondtuk, hogy oké, de az összes mellékszal van. Ezt tessék?
Nem értettem, hogy oké.
Mondom, a mamámnak írtam,
Ezt értettem,
hogy
csak
megy a livestreamé, és azt írta vissza, hogy tök jó a kép, minden, viszont az összes duma hallatszik. Tehát amit így a tehát amit az emberek mennek, az frankot fölé.
Hát igen, mert itt van a közönség között, itt van a mikrofon.
Igen, tehát ezt írta vissza, hogy ne pusfogjanak, mert hogy bejönnek, itt van.
Egy. Előtt nem azt itt.
Igen.
Tényleg? Akkor gyorsan.
És mert a hangod. Igen, föl. Tudod, fordulsz. És ráadásul
Ja, ez balra fordul, és jobbra megy.
Hát a kamerát rossz. Yes, he was looking through the
Mit kéne állni?
Én úgy állítom, akár a bár. Minden kamerában. Már rosszul látom. Ez így megy. Yes, it's well found. So we've got gaps in it, which is also Did you have that already? Or
Good. No, it's, yeah. Yes, I think. Oh, it's flux. Yeah, very few people can try that. Well, this is the product. Good. Getting a beautiful.
Yes, right. Yes.
Yes, so it's quite a strong place. Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, another round of exciting topics and distinguished speakers coming up for our last session today. We are going to talk about growth and trade, transatlantic trade and investment partnership. On the panel today are the following gentlemen. Mr. György Kerekes, who is chairman of the Hungarian Trade House. We have Mr. Paul Griffith, who is deputy director. We have Mr. Gábor Kutashi from Corvinus University. He has done extensive research on TTIP. and Mr. László Hákonyi. He is the Hungarian trade negotiator and member of the Trade Policy Committee from the Hungarian Foreign Ministry. Our panel discussion today will be moderated by my distinguished colleague from the Századvég Economic Research Institute, Mr. László György, PhD. Mr. László György, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I was asked to be fast, so that is why I'm giving the floor to our first presenter. I kindly ask all of you to be as short as possible, focus on the most important facts you would like to present us today. It means it can be as long as 5 minutes long, your presentation, or maximum 10 minutes. Mr. Kerekes, please.
I don't know if we have a possibility to have a presentation here. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Hungarian National Trading House, I would like to welcome you here. Just as we wait for the presentation, I have to tell that I discussed with my friend and former colleague last year that I'll be a kind of a debate maker. So I've prepared a sort of a presentation that is more likely, for start a debate about TTIP. Very few words about my background. Now I'm the CEO of the new National Trading House, but in the last decade I mostly worked for the government agency for trade and investment. It is called ITD Hungary and then HITA, the Hungarian Trade Development Agency, and a very short period at Századvég Economic institutions as well. So. It works. So I chose my title from and stole it from Paul Simon. So I'd rather be a hammer than a nail. The question is that do we have the right tool or not? So that's the idea. I think the idea behind the TTIP. It's now more than the fact that the European Union and the US are losing global competitiveness. I mean, if we talk about competitiveness, it means power. So these two formerly global leaders lose the power. So what can be done? We have to join our forces to regain our power and to create a future superpower and regain the global rank, the first rank. So how can it be done? If we join our forces, probably the idea behind TTIP is that let's create a large single market. So if even the size can compete with China, India, and large other players, and form a free trade and investment agreement, this one. And here we are at the future superpower. It's probably too simple. So I know that it's just probably the idea behind it. I know that the other gentleman will talk about a lot of pros and cons very shortly. Of course, the pro TTIP is the potential annual GDP growth, this local competitiveness I talked about, the free movement of ideas and innovation and whatever. And also, the whole thing is not about conventional trade barriers, but other focus areas such as free regulations in fracking, GMOs, and whatever. The main con TTIPs are that we can say that the trade barriers are already mostly eliminated, so it's not needed. And what's remaining, like food safety, is necessary. Many of the players fear that the unbalanced protection of investors may create a sphere of multinational companies that cannot be regulated by nations or by governments. And especially here in Hungary, we feel that Eastern Europe or Central Eastern Europe, as well as the middle states of the US, won't have the advantages, just the disadvantages. And there's also a sentence from Noam Chomsky, and he says that the details of the TTIP are not a secret to hundreds of corporate lawyers and lobbyists, but are secrets for us, and who are writing detailed regulations, and we can guess that's why it is kept in secret. So there's a fear to sense. That can be the TTIP for Hungary. It's mainly from our experience at the Trading House and former ITA that there's no real barrier for the new investors from the US. In last, US was the second and if you see the last 25 years, not only 5 years, Luxembourg is still around. I mean, in the past, the US companies could come here to Hungary to invest via Luxembourg or other European countries. And again, if you want to be the real manufacturing center here in the back of Europe, like this small bar or I don't know what here, it's absolutely open. So all the key players from G to so there's no real barrier. If you see the trade from the Hungarian side, we see that companies, Hungarian companies, are suffering from lack of knowledge and contact and not the regulation in the US. We have now more than 50 clients here at the National Trading House who are active in the US. And of course, they curse FDA and the Food and Drug Administration or other administrative boards of the US, but we see that the real problem is not these kind of regulations, but the absolute lack of knowledge and of course resources to enter the market. So I can claim that probably not this kind of TTIP what's needed. So I believe in that we need a strong EU and US partnership, but not these kind of agreements. I think we share many other values, like diversity, the belief in innovation, the individual and continuous education, and this livable environment what we have. So my sentence would be that creating an economically and environmentally sustainable alliance between the US and the EU with the main aim to increase knowledge, innovation, and welfare of people. So this should be in focus rather than easing more regulations. Why I chose these values. Diversity is beautiful, but not only beautiful, but it's very important to the economy as well, because diversity creates a pool for evolution. So we need a lot of SMEs, all the new ones, startups and traditional family-owned factories, whatever, with different ideas, different services, different products. Because when the environment changes, and we feel that it changes every time, there's always a company that can adapt to the new challenges. Certainly, the TTIP would result on a more standardized world of companies, and that's not what we need. Just a good example. I remember in 2006, it was before the crisis, a new foreign trade strategy was made in Hungary, and it was built on biotechnology and ICT, and explicitly it said that food industry has no potential to grow, so we won't support it. And what we see here now, just 8 years after that, in the exporting companies, 30% of our new clients are from the food industry, and there's huge potential in that. And our recent survey pointed out that in the last 3 years, the average profit rate of these food industry companies on the export market grew by more than 70%. So the environment changes and we need new ones. And also the same problem with the GMO products. Probably there's a lot of talk is about GMO regarding TTIP. So the real problem is not that if GMO is dangerous for your health or not. The problem is that it decreases diversity. And in case of emergency, we won't have the fresh water in the pool, so we won't have new products, new genes, whatever. Innovation and education. It's again a value where we still have, and we can strengthen by a new kind of agreement. According to Bloomberg's most innovative countries list, even though we are complaining a lot here in Hungary, we are still ranked 26. And the R&D intensity, height intensity, and whatever. So globally we are in a good place. China, with its huge resources and efforts, is only 25th. And among the top 10, you can see Sweden, Denmark, Switzerland, Finland, a lot of European countries, and the US as well. So, and if you see the best universities in the world, US and UK universities are 19 out of the top 20. So this is a value what we have, and we can strengthen it, I think. And also that sustainable environment, I mean, a place where it's good to live, to translate it. There are a lot of talks about that drinkable water, clean air, and natural habitats will be the 21st century's most valuable resources. And Europe and North America might be in the key position of these resources. To summarize it, ask a mother if she would choose Beijing or Vienna for a baby to live. Ask a student in the third world where he or she would like to learn, or ask an inventor or an engineer where he or she would like to apply for a patent. So these are the values what we have, and we can strengthen, and probably let's forget this version of TTIP. That was my provocative start of the debate. I'm absolutely curious about my fellows here at the table, what they would say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hall, for this.
Thank you very much for our conveners today for organising this and giving me the opportunity to speak today. I have two main reasons for being here. One of them is just to give the British view on TTIP. As you probably all know, we are great supporters and think there's great potential benefits. But more importantly, to get Hungarian views on the deal, where you see priorities, where there are sensitivities, and what you think we can do to make sure that we do actually get the best possible deal. We all recognise that negotiating with the Americans is not an easy thing to do. They're very hard-nosed. So we need to think carefully about how we push and get the most from the deal for all of our citizens. I'll say a couple of things just about the background to TTIP before looking then at some of the benefits and where exactly we think that they come from, and setting out perhaps some of the differences between the UK and other members of the European Union. We have overlapping interests, but they're not all identical. I'm going to touch on some of the sensitive issues and hopefully bust some myths about what is included in the deal and explain what is not included. Just before finally moving on about next steps. I'm not going to get into a discussion about where the discussions are right now. Trade discussions are complicated, they take a long time, and you probably don't want to hear right now all of the gory detail. So I'm going to leave this as an overview level. So what is TTIP? Certainly the British government is a firm believer in the benefits of trade with time. That growth goes along results from trade. We are committed to global trade. We think in the best possible world, there would be a comprehensive world trade deal through the WTO that liberalises trade. For a long time, that was our main emphasis in slows with more bilateral deals There are a number being negotiated by the EU and other countries right now. Of the EU ones, TTIP is by far the biggest one with potentially the greatest benefits. There's also wider political benefits to the deal. Certainly, we are all aware of the importance of strengthening transatlantic relations. That's very, very prominent right now. And we're also aware of changes in the global economy, the importance of bringing emerging markets into the global economic system, but also making sure that there are clear, firm rules for that system. And we think TTIP can help along with that. We've certainly seen recently that other countries, having seen the US negotiate with Asian countries and Europe, other countries are now including bilateral deals. And the WTO has been able to make progress. It completed part of the Doha round before Christmas. In terms of the benefits, there have been quite a lot of studies published. I won't get into all of them, and you can take them for what you want, but the main Commission study, on which the UK has used a similar methodology, suggests that there could be benefits of up to £100 billion a year to Europe, £10 billion a year to the UK over the long term. That's a small percentage of the size of European and UK economies, and for the Hungarian economy as well. But given where we are right now in the economic climate, the problems that we've all suffered from, we think these gains actually are very significant. It will promote growth, it will promote jobs, promote investments, it will be good for consumers. So there is actually a lot to go for. We certainly have no trouble with people who say that the benefits are too small to worry about. It is perhaps not the biggest set of reforms that need to be undertaken in our economies, but we think there's a whole range of things that we can do at the same time, and TTIP is one of the most important things that we can do to promote growth without having to spend public money, which certainly the UK is trying to do as much as possible to get growth without further public expenditure. We also think that the wider world can benefit as standards are produced, harmonised and made clearer on trade and growth. So where do the benefits come from TTIP? Well, we certainly know that most of the tariffs between the EU and the US are already very low. So there's not that much room there in percentage terms across tariffs. In fact, in some cases, the tariffs have been removed completely already. But not completely. There's certainly sectors for some products where tariffs are 20% or higher. And in some cases, actually, that just eliminates trade in those products. Things like food, clothing, shoes, all have high tariffs for particular products. There's high tariffs on automobiles, which is important to the UK. It's important to Hungary, given its place in global supply chains. And there's other areas where actually reducing tariffs can make a substantial difference in sectors of the economy that matter. For the UK, it's an important thing, but it's not actually the most important element of the deal. Most of our trade with the US is actually in services. So we will benefit, fortunately, less than the rest of the EU from eliminating tariffs. But it is important. The second area that I want to talk about, actually, is regulatory coherence. This is not a traditional area for trade agreements. TTIP is more ambitious, it's going further than other agreements if we succeed. And this is the area where actually we see the great preponderance of benefits for the EU, and especially the UK. In most cases, the traditional transparent trade barriers have been removed. There's a massive amount of trade already with the US, there's a massive amount of investments. And the UK and the American economies are closely linked, as are many other European economies, either directly or through their part in the supply chain. But there are differences in regulatory approaches, and whilst on a day-to-day basis, businesses might not really pay too much attention to them, and certainly for larger businesses, they have the scale and scope to overcome those differences. They can afford to set up factories and deal with different regulations, have different supply chains. They can certainly afford to pay the lawyers to negotiate all of the barriers and so on. But medium-sized businesses and small businesses will gain disproportionately from greater coherence. I think there has been concerns about what exactly this means. Some people have accused TTIP of aiming for a race to the bottom in health, safety, environmental standards. That's certainly not the case. the EU and the US both have high standards in all of those areas, and their publics are very concerned to make sure that high safety standards remain. And other high standards also remain. So the sorts of things that we want to address, I can give a couple of examples of this. Hopefully it will become a bit clearer. In the automotive sector, for example, cars on both sides of the Atlantic are safe. There's lots and lots of regulations that have been built in over the years to make sure that is the case. But the systems of regulation, and in some cases, are necessarily different. One example, probably my favourite, is the idea that when you hit the brake in the US in a car, the red light will come on, and the dashboard will say, stop. In Europe, you hit the pedal, the little red light also comes on, and there'll be an indicator that indicates that you're stopping. Well, actually, both systems work perfectly well. There's no reason why car companies ought to have to produce different designs for the different markets when they're equally safe. So one thing that we can do, it's certainly in automobiles, but elsewhere as well, is a system of mutual recognition, where it's clear that the standards achieve the same effect. We should recognise that that's the case. It's one of the ways that we can make a difference. There's other areas, pharmaceuticals, for example, where there's a massive transatlantic trade and a lot of innovation here. It's an important sector for the UK and the European economies. But manufacturing facilities have to maintain high standards. How does that happen? Well, there's a set of standards which are applied by European regulators. And then if they want to export to the US, the US regulators will come and inspect the same factory to see whether it meets the same sort of high standard, but just in a different way, with a duplicate inspection. So we think there's possibilities of cutting down on that sort of duplication. And this applies across the board, whether it's pharmaceuticals, there's scope within the chemical sector for greater coordination. Certainly something that's very important for the UK is financial services, where there has been massive reforms following the financial crisis. Whole new systems of regulation have been put in place. We don't think that TTIP should try to overturn them or weaken them, but there is scope for further coordination. And for the UK, certainly including financial services, it's an important part of the deal. Where else will the benefits come from? One big area is public procurement. There are already bilateral agreements on public procurements. Certainly within the EU, we've seen the benefits of wider competition and overcoming national barriers. But there's a long way to go. This is going to be a challenging area, but opening up to the US markets at the federal and state level to European businesses will be incredibly important. And there's other things as well in the deal, like improving customs facilitation. Customs processes are important. Certainly secure borders is something that every country now is concerned about. But there's no reason why the processes ought to be different, opaque, ambiguous, and so on. So there's definitely improvements that can be done there in a relatively simple way. So there's a whole series of potential benefits to the deal that will apply to a number of sectors of the economy. Some of them will be more challenging to agree than others, but we are very confident that progress will be made, and are pushing hard for that, given the potential benefits. I'll just touch on some of the sensitive issues that have been raised. Certainly in the UK, non-governmental organisations are concerned about a range of issues. Some of these concerns are things that the government also recognises and hopes to see an improvement in TTIP than previous trade deals. But there's other things where we think that probably NGOs have got the wrong message, and I want to make sure that people understand that. Things like GMOs, where there is a different approach in Europe, where there are regulations and laws around how GM products are to be approved. We don't have the same position exactly as the Americans or some of our European partners on this. We think that the science ought to be applied, the reasonable risk assessments ought to be applied, and the processes should work effectively. But we certainly don't see a flood of American products coming in that meet their standards and not European standards. And the point has been made to me that GMOs are explicitly excluded from Hungary and its constitution. We don't see TTIP as being something that will amend any country's constitution. This is far from the case. There's other concerns around investor-state dispute settlements, where the Commission is currently carrying out an important consultation and is trying to get views from across Europe on this. It's a difficult issue, it's a complicated issue. For the UK, we have about 90 of these arrangements in place already. And for those of you who may not know, what they do is they allow investors to take states to an independent tribunal where they feel that their investments have been unfairly expropriated. There is a history of these operating to protect European businesses. And there's also been a number of controversial cases that has made the public very alive to the issue. In the UK, we have been sued twice under these agreements. We have lost neither case. It is certainly not something that we worry about when the government is thinking about what laws to make or how we regulate. We think there is a reasonable mechanism here to be had that protects investment and that can provide a model for the wider world. So that is one issue that we will carry on debating and try to get the best possible deal. There's a few other things that I'll just mention in closing. One is small business. Most small businesses don't really think about exporting across the Atlantic, except they're starting to nowadays. We're finding actually there's a lot more accidental exporters. Businesses that are linked up with the internet actually just find themselves being asked to send products overseas. There's actually an increasingly large trade about just from small businesses. They use eBay, they use Amazon, and they could do a lot more. It's important that small businesses across Europe be ambitious. We're certainly encouraging them to do so. In the UK, real businesses, and certainly big business, can see the opportunities, but also small business needs to understand this, and we are doing our best to make sure that they do understand the potential benefits and can take advantage of the new opportunities, whether it's through improved customs procedures, regulatory coherence, making it worthwhile the investment in a new overseas market, having to overcome barriers that will become small. And last of all, consumers. Certainly consumer standards to be high. I've already said that that's exactly what we'd expect. But also consumers will benefit from lower tariffs. They'll get cheaper jeans, they'll get cheaper clothing. There will be more products available, and ultimately on bigger products that are available, where there are tariffs that are lowered, whether it's on cars, there can be substantial tariffs on cars and some vehicles that industry use. These are all areas where consumers can benefit. Of course, consumers also are employees, and we expect TTIP to lead to a large increase in jobs, something that's a concern to all governments at the moment. So there's a substantial deal there. I think just finally, in concluding, I want to say this, TTIP is going to be a challenging process. Certainly to get the best possible deal for the EU, we have some hard negotiations ahead of us. We're ambitious that a deal can be reached in the course of next year. I would expect it to include substantive liberalisation across a range of areas. We see that certainly in our benefit, but we also know that it's to the benefit of the US, and we think that a deal can be reached. There's a wider political picture about European reform. TTIP can contribute to that. Certainly, if we can liberalise US exports of energy, that's an important component of improving energy security in the European Union, and that is important. As I said, this can help promote wider deals globally and bilaterally, and lead to an increase in growth, an increase in wealth, and improvements for everybody. That's what I'd like to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Griffiths, for your inspirational presentation. Now I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Kutashi. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation. One of the reasons I can be here is that I participated in an economic research organized by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Hungary to estimate the expected growth and employment effects and industrial special effects of the TTIP for Hungary. I would start with a global aspect, and Mr. Griffiths dropped up a question that what is the main benefit or the biggest benefit from the TTIP. I would add one more aspect, or maybe it's a more strategic view, that actually EU and USA, one by one, they are one force of the global market. So if they united in trade or in trade integration, it means that half of the global market. This is itself a strategic strength for the two regions, but on the other hand, it means not only gross benefits for USA and Europe, because this market size is big enough to motivate the rest of the world to adjust to the common standards of USA and EU if there will be common standards of regulation. So it can be also a positive spillover for the rest of the world if we do not forget about that. I said if there will be common standards. That's an important question. Basically, between USA and EU, there's only one sector, the agriculture, where we can still find high tariffs. But because it's mostly about raw materials, just simply tariff cuts does not mean significant growth opportunities, because everyone's products will be more competitive if we simply cut the tariffs in agriculture. What is interesting in the research that basically, or mostly, we can expect growth results from the manufacturing sector and not from the agriculture trade liberalization. Why? Because of the regulations, like the non-trade barriers cancellation. Will it happen or will it not? How big volume will it be? So how high share of the non-trade barriers will be cancelled? Already two of us, and I will be the third one, mentioned the GMO question. So this is also a regulation question, a non-trade barrier question. So USA actually will get a, let's say, absolute advantage in agriculture trade if they can achieve liberalization of genetic questions in agriculture and food industry. As far as I heard informally, actually they don't want to close the negotiations without this achievement. In case of manufacturing, Hungary, of course, is the #1 car producer, we can say, in the world, or want to be. But it's strange that all of the participants, or most of the participants, not just Hungary, but Sweden, UK, USA, Germany, and so on, the biggest growth of output, the biggest growth of production is expectable in the car manufacturing and spare part production and all other industries supplying the automobile industry. I don't know the exact reason why, but it seems that the likelihood of regulation harmonization will be maybe the easiest in this sector. For example, in chemical industry, in medicine industry, such kind of traditional differences exist, which are very costly for the producers to sell products to each other's markets or buy licenses. And also the classification of products is so different that, for example, in the chemical industry and related industries, it's very low, little positive, 0.00 something percentage is expected to give an additional growth. For example, for Hungarian pharmaceutical industry or chemical industry, which are actually strategic industries, but this low additional growth is typical in other researches made by other countries too. So we can say very simply, we can close the manufacturing topic. This automobile industry, where we can expect additional growth. And one more big sector, service sector, we have no time to detail all the sectors, but general service sector, it's also an interesting question of what will happen after the TTIP or in the TTIP. I would say that particularly one part of the services are very much restricted to regional level. For example, air flights, and that's there. Well, we cannot expect liberalization, and it seems that airlines industry, neither USA nor EU, do expect any kind of favor toward each other, and nothing liberalization. The other group of service sectors, like for example, medical service outsourcing, it already operates very well. So US health insurance companies like very much to outsource medical services like X-ray analysis or even medical treatment like dentist or other services. So have the patients fly to Europe or fly to somewhere in the world where they can find cheaper services. So it already very free and very liberalized. Also, I can mention the IT services. So that's why in the service sector we can neither expect too much significant effect. So very simply, I would just summarize the Hungarian interests, I mean in economic sense. If Hungary gets satisfied in the car manufacturing, then Hungary is a very strong supporter of TTIP. It is also because a small country has very few strategic industries, and if small countries in EU can get one or two industrial benefits, then they will be satisfied. I guess that's enough of that. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gulesh, for presenting your results. I would like to ask Mr. Ratman to close this presentation.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I guess as one basic difference compared to all other free trade negotiations that the EU has started, and there are at least a dozen of them, and that is the sheer size of the two partners. What we are speaking now is about 1/3 of global trade, almost half of global GDP. And clearly, it is much more interested than the negotiations that, for example, the EU had with Colombia and Peru. Although, when it comes to the real discussion, it's not necessarily that much different. But the public interest, the interest of third partners, is pretty much heightened, and it's a difficult job to meet all those expectations. And expectations are very divergent. We have heard from the colleagues, in particular Mr. Kerekes, making some provocative statements, what may or may not happen. I guess may is the dangerous word in Earth. If you see advertisements, then you will find that chocolate consumption may save you from stroke, but also that chocolate consumption may cause obesity. And similarly, there are fears from both sides of the Atlantic what TTIP may bring about, and there are heightened expectations. Commissioners sometimes arguing that the TTIP would be 545 euros per year for each European family of 4. Now, I would not start thinking about how to spend this 500 extra euros. The negotiation will take some time, 1-2 years. There is a ratification process. The concessions shall be implemented, in particular in the most sensitive areas, during 3, 5, 10 years. So what we are speaking about is how we visualize transatlantic economic cooperation for the mid-2020s. And from this aspect, if you look at the recent developments and see that according to economists, about 90% of world economic growth will come in the medium term outside Europe, then clearly there is a need to have some outside stimulus, and TTIP is a possibility for that. I heard colleagues speaking about tariffs. Okay, in Europe the average tariff is about 4–4.5%. In the US even smaller than that, 2.5–3%. But trade between the EU and the US exceeds 2 billion euros daily. I repeat, 2 billion euros daily. So if you take only 3–4% of that amount, then you speak about 60–80 million euros daily. That would be spared if there is a tariff reduction. Because of a huge amount of trade, even smaller quantities would come. Now, as to Hungary, we are strong supporters of the process. Strong support does not mean that we have no offensive or defensive interests. Seemingly, if you read articles or listen to the public in the US or in Europe, on both sides of the Atlantic, people have strong belief that their governments are stupid and their trade negotiators are weak. So Europeans are afraid that the Americans will force us to accept substandard protection for workers, for the environment, and other issues, safety and whatever you can count. But the same view is there in the American NGO community. They are afraid that European food products not meeting the high American standards will flood them. American textile workers are afraid of the European competition. So the common point is that everybody believes that in the negotiating power of the other. I do not believe that would be close to the realities. When it comes to us being a small country and our US exports accounting only about 3% of total Hungarian exports, we may say that who cares? But the situation is more complex because Hungary is exporting mostly to Europe, but we are exporting products that will either incorporated into some final products or being in the same stage of manufacturing exported later on to overseas. So the indirect effect of TTIP on the Hungarian economy is pretty important, and we have to take it into account. Also, when it comes to defensive points, let's say in agriculture, we should not be afraid of American meat and food products flooding the Tesco, Auchan, or other local stores, but rather how we could compete with these products on our well-paying and well-established European markets. That is why the Hungarian government looks for an ambitious and balanced agreement. The trick is what you consider ambitious and various imbalance. For us, the balance is not simply a balance between rights and obligations in the US and Europe as such, but also we look for a fair share of benefits and burdens within the European Union among member states. And I guess that the negotiations shall and will do that. The last aspect I would like to reflect is regulatory cooperation. Clearly, I agree with colleagues that holds the most prospect. But it will not be a unified regulatory area. It will not result that either the EU or the US will relax their existing regulations. Rather, the issue is what we normally do, national governments, although at this point in time we try it in a transatlantic scale, how to cut red tape, how to do away with unnecessary and costly differences in standards, regulations, certification systems. So it is not something that is unknown, because basically, I guess each of our government is doing that. The new stuff is that we utilize the Atlantic Ocean, and it will take quite some time to get there. What we can do with TTIP right now is to start the process, and that may have quite a huge impact on our economies. Recently, in the WTO, an agreement on trade facilitation has been reached. We hope that it will enter into force from next year. And this regulatory harmonization or cooperation is pretty similar to that. And I just quoted two examples. To clear through customs one container of goods, it takes right now in Hong Kong 3 days, 4 documents, and some $1,000. In Chad, it takes 180 days, 45 documents, and $8,000. Just because of different regulatory systems. Although I would not compare Chad or Hong Kong to the TTIP directly, but it shows what tremendous effect simple measures that cut into bureaucratic, unnecessary obstacles can get to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Marconi. Thank you very much for all of your very thoughtful presentations. I'm very inspired. According to my understanding of my role, I have to be a little bit naive and provocative. And it wouldn't be difficult for me to play this role. We heard about some beliefs about TTIP. We heard about benefits, and you talked a lot about economic growth and trade growth, and how trade growth and economic growth relates to our well-being here in Europe. My concern is I'm the Hungarian citizens' perspective. In the last 40 years, the Hungarian GDP per employee tripled, while the net wages increased only by 28%, while our trade increased enormously, skyrocketed. So my question would be, how would TTIP relate to our expectations differently? What we can conclude from our past experiences in the last 20 years, last 40 years. How will TTIP be that agreement which will help us to gain some benefits from this trade increase and growth increase? I saw that you were taking notes, and sometimes you were agreeing and nodding. So if you think my introduction too naive or too provocative, just reflect to each other's presentations. Mr. Gudish.
So about your question, basically the speed up of trade volume is on both sides it will happen. And when we talk about benefits, it means also we have to spread the benefits among participants. So on one hand we will see a very significant, or actually that's the expectation that more 10% will be the export growth and import growth in the countries, but they will cancel each other. So that's why the income growth is very limited. We can even read about 5–10% growth opportunity in GDP in some European countries and close to 6–7 in USA also. But these are the most optimistic scenarios when everything will be harmonized, every kind of regulation and no tariff, of course, that's the basic, but every non-trade barrier will be cancelled. It's very difficult otherwise just to harmonize. We haven't mentioned the public procurement aspects, which is also part of our negotiation, or in the negotiation haven't talked about the investment protection and most favored nation principle to use in public procurement. So I guess this is also a limit of growth, and the very good scenarios are just hopes and will not be realized because it's impossible to harmonize everything. We also concluded. So we will see a big volume of trade, but it means flow there and backward of products and services. So in the end, we will have just very thin surplus in income.
How can we maximize the potential benefits of TTIP, Mr. Barker? I'm turning to you because TTIP is often criticized for its non-transparent decision making. Is it true or not? And how is it?
The transparency of decision making and the potential benefits are different stuff, I would say. When it comes to the benefits, of course, what I would say is important. All participants, that means the European Commission, individual member states, and the United States, should pay quite an attention to manage expectations. Because here, for example, what you said, as an average guy, is a too high of an expectation. Free trade agreement will not change your life. It may help. Of course, export volume and your average salary is always not necessarily in correlation, but let's just look at the Hungarian example. For the past years, GDP stagnated, investments, the rate of investments went back, domestic consumption was pretty weak. The only bright spot in the Hungarian economy until last year, that was exports. The Hungarian export surplus was in the past 3 years about 7 billion euros. And the Hungarian exports of goods and services constitute 95% if measured GDP. So for a small country with a small market, foreign trade, I guess, is essential to generate economic growth. And I believe that even if TTIP on the longer term will only increase Hungarian exports for, I don't know, 10%, 15%, that will not necessarily change the whole picture, but at least it will give a stimulus to companies to look for new export markets, to broaden their production, maybe some people even to find new jobs, and that would be the benefit. Now, if you asked about the secret nature of trade negotiations, yes, there is. Admit it. I have not seen in my life any successful trade negotiation that was between 500 million people here and 200 million people there. So it is not a chess game between the guys, one in one country and the other is the other, and you put your move in a letter, then post it, and then you got back the letter. You need to trade advantages. And in order to trade advantages, sometimes you need to show flexibility. In order to get flexibility from your partner, it's inherent. If you do everything in the open, none of us would be flexible in any subject because of the fear from our own constituency. Everybody would like to play safe, being rigid, just to demonstrate his own constituency that they are not giving up. So that is why it is secret. But what is important here in the TTIP is a continued and wide-ranging, well-informed dialogue with civil society, with the average Hungarians, average UK citizens, and average Americans, because that is too important to be the victim of misunderstandings. And that is why we have to explain in a patient way that there will be no hormone-treated American crews coming to the streets of Budapest. They will not be forced to eat GMO treated American stuff, and a number of similar type of misunderstanding. What can help is giving out information as much as possible, but clearly take the concrete negotiating positions to the negotiations.
Thank you very much. How much time do we have? We still have. I'm really enjoying this conversation. I almost agree with everything. Just one addition: the Hungarian current account between 1992 and 2008 was in a huge deficit, and I hope that net exports can be maintained with higher investment rate and higher consumption in Hungary as well in the near and middle term future. Mr. Griffiths.
Thank you. If I can make a couple of points. I'm sitting with two people who are far more expert than I am on the Hungarian economy, which can be beneficial from TTIP. So I was making general points where certainly trade does go along with growth. It doesn't go along exactly. So the growth in exports that Hungary and other countries will see won't be the same as the same sort of the same level of growth that individuals will see, but people will be able to get cheaper products, businesses will have more opportunities, and TTIP is only one of a number of trade agreements that are
being negotiated right now. But along with that, we need to complete the European single market. There's a whole range of economic reforms that countries need to undertake to improve their own competitiveness. Those reforms differ from one country to another. So we have to come up with the same plans to take advantage of the opportunities as best it can. On transparency, 2 points. The goal of the European governments recognise the importance of making these negotiations as transparent as possible. They're probably the most transparent trade negotiations that the European Union has ever had. It's published a number of detailed papers. It's meeting regularly with a large number of civil society groups. So we are very much aware of that. I don't think people actually would want to read the detail of every meeting, but there's a lot of material out there already. And I would advise people to look on the Commission's website where some of that material is. The UK government has provided a lot of information, as has the US government. So there's a lot of transparency there. Last point on transparency. If anybody has the detailed US negotiating position with all of its bottom lines and so on, I'll be available at the end of this meeting and I can pass it to you there.
Thank you very much. I know that Mr. Kerekes bears a degree in biology as well, right? How about your concerns about GMOs? And if you have other more general comments, I'd appreciate it.
I said in the presentation that today it's not a question if it's dangerous for your health or not. It's just a question of ruling the whole market. So if we open to these kind of aggressive trade, like what the US company is doing in GMO field, agricultural technologies, the Hungarian micro and small companies will suffer because there will be probably no place for them to innovate. And it's more about innovation. I think it's a normal field that many of the small innovative companies feel about the big play. We sense that that's the most difficult area for the small ones to. They are able to make innovation, but to enter the market, that's the real problem. I don't think these kind of large agreements would help them. Rather to have at least 1 or 2 places here in the European Union that they can grow, they can try, and then they would cover the whole market. So it's not about biology anymore, it's more trade.
Thank you very much. Do you have any more comments here at the table? Yeah, please.
Just, not only Europeans here, but Hungarians specifically here from new development. I will just tell you this is an example. Hungarian companies right now competing on a single European market without any specific leverage or advantage. It's one-on-one competition. This is a developed market. This is a demanding market. And we have to compete at least with the 27 other members. Yet, since our accession to the EU, Hungary runs a trade surplus within the European Union, a growing one. In the past 4 years, it is in the range of 9 to 10 billion euros per year, much larger than the Hungarian total trade surplus. It seems, after all, that we are not totally uncompetitive if there are fair conditions. So it would be a bit of an exaggeration to be afraid from the competition that may come from the United States or, as a matter of fact, from any other partner. The key is to put the conditions right. And that is the job of the trade negotiators. Thank you.
How do you say to put the conditions right? That's a very nice closing sentence. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your presentation, and I will leave the closing remarks to Ms. Knott after this discussion.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for very stimulating and interesting lectures and discussions. So thank you for the moderator for that. Before I give the floor to Ambassador Lott for the closing remarks, on behalf of Századvég Foundation, I'd like to express my gratitude to the British Embassy for organizing this conference with the Századvég School of Politics Foundation. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for providing such a beautiful and impressive venue. Ben Lecoq, thank you for a lot of work that you're putting into this. I think that we have found very interesting and timely topic, the future of the European Union. Distinguished audience, I very much hope that you have enjoyed today's conference. Thank you, and Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's tempting to try and draw conclusions from today. Tempting, but daunting. Daunting because I don't think I've been to a shorter conference which has touched on so many topical, vital, continent-wide issues in so short a time, and one which has covered them with the sort of granularity, if you like, with the expertise which we've had up here on the stage, not just for this session from TTIP, but through the day. Which, briefly reflecting, I think for me, our task of the day was to try and pick up the issues which are the most key for the EU right now. Future of Europe, the competitiveness of Europe, and try and identify key issues, but also the issues where the British government, the Hungarian government, British MPs, Hungarian MPs, British businessmen, Hungarian businessmen, and also academics from both sides share views, and where we have a coincidence of interest. I'm pleased with that, because I think that was quite a challenge. But I think that our presenters, I think you, our audience, the brave stalwarts who've managed to make it through the whole day, have done an enormous amount to achieve it. So instead of trying to sum up and instead of trying to draw conclusions, let me just thank all of you. Let me thank our presenters, let me thank everybody on the stage right now, our presenters through the day, and let me encourage you to keep this debate, to keep these conversations going, to keep these relationships going. Because I think what we detected here is a great coincidence, as I said, of interest and a point of view. So thank you very much, and let me invite all of you to join me for a drink, perhaps something small to eat, as we mull over the conclusions of the day. To Századvég, to all of Századvég, all the ones who've come here today, a big, big thank you. We look forward to working with you in future. To the rest, we look forward very much to welcoming you back to the embassy. First, please, a drink together. Thank you.
Legyen belőle.
politicians.
Right.